The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the rooftop terrace, its sparkle reflecting off champagne glasses and polished smiles. I stood near the bar, nursing a beer while watching my wife Sandra work the crowd like a seasoned politician. Her promotion party was in full swing, 50 of her closest colleagues, executives, and family members celebrating her ascension to senior manager at Technova Industries. I'd arrived 20 minutes late, still wearing the jeans and button-down I'd thrown on after finishing a client call. Sandra had shot me a look that could freeze hell, but I just shrugged. After 12 years of marriage, I knew that look well. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sandra's voice cut through the chatter as she tapped her champagne flute with a silver spoon. The crowd turned toward her, faces expectant and eager. She stood on the small platform near the terrace's edge, the city skyline glittering behind her like a backdrop designed for her moment of triumph. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this incredible milestone with me," she began, her voice carrying that practiced corporate tone I'd grown to despise. "It's been a long journey to get here, and I couldn't have done it without the support of my amazing team, my wonderful parents, and—" Her eyes found mine across the crowd, and something cold flickered in them. "Oh, and I suppose I should introduce someone special. This is my ex-husband, well, technically still my husband, but let's be honest, he has no degree, no future, and just freeloads off my money. If your partner did this to you in public, would you stay silent or walk away?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before nervous laughter began to ripple through the crowd. Her parents, Margaret and Richard, chuckled from their prime spot near the front. Margaret actually covered her mouth with her hand, as if she were trying to contain her amusement. Richard nodded approvingly, finally hearing someone voice what he'd probably thought for years. Sandra's colleagues from Technova exchanged glances, some smirking, others looking uncomfortable. Jessica from HR actually snorted with laughter. Brad from marketing raised his glass in what looked like a toast to my humiliation. I stood there, absorbing every laugh, every whisper, every pitying look. The beer in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. My face burned with embarrassment, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of dealing with Sandra's casual cruelty had taught me to mask my reactions. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the public nature of the humiliation, or maybe it was the way her parents looked so satisfied, or maybe it was just that I'd finally reached my breaking point. Whatever it was, I felt something shift inside me, a door closing on one part of my life and another opening to something darker. I raised my beer bottle slowly, deliberately. The crowd watched, probably expecting me to slink away in shame or maybe make some self-deprecating joke to ease the tension. Instead, I smiled. Not the fake smile I'd perfected for corporate events and family dinners, but something genuine and cold. "Cheers," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent terrace. I paused, letting the word hang in the air before adding, "This is the last time any of you will see me." Then I turned and walked toward the exit. "Nate, wait." Sandra's voice cracked slightly. "I was just joking." I didn't turn around. I didn't acknowledge her. I just kept walking, my footsteps echoing against the marble floor of the terrace. Behind me, I heard the crowd's murmur growing louder, more confused. Then, cutting through it all, came a voice that made my smile widen. "What did you just say?" David Chen, Technova's CEO, had apparently just arrived and caught the tail end of Sandra's introduction. His voice carried the kind of authority that made boardrooms fall silent and stock prices fluctuate. I paused at the terrace door but didn't turn around. "David!" Sandra's voice was bright, forced. "You just missed my little speech. I was just introducing everyone to my husband." "Do you understand?" David's voice cut through hers like a blade. "That he owns 80% of this company's assets." The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically feel the shock radiating from the crowd behind me. But I didn't turn around. I pushed through the door and headed for the elevator, leaving chaos in my wake. The elevator ride down felt like descending into freedom. 23 floors of blessed silence, broken only by the soft ding of each passing level. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone was already buzzing with calls and texts. Sandra's name flashed on the screen repeatedly. I powered it off and tossed it onto the passenger seat of my Tesla. The drive home took me through the heart of the city, past the gleaming towers of the financial district where I'd built my fortune while Sandra climbed her corporate ladder. She'd never asked about my work beyond the surface level. Freelance tech consulting was how I'd always described it, and she'd never pushed for details. Why would she? In her mind, I was just her underachieving husband who worked from home in his pajamas. The irony was beautiful in its simplicity. While she'd been grinding her way up the corporate hierarchy, collecting titles and corner offices, I'd been quietly building an investment empire. Technova had been one of my first major acquisitions 3 years ago, a struggling startup with good bones and terrible management. My $12 million investment had saved the company and funded the expansion that created Sandra's job. She'd never made the connection. Why would she? I'd used my LLC, Meridian Capital Holdings, for all business transactions. To her, I was just Nate, the guy who worked from the spare bedroom and didn't wear suits to dinner parties. My apartment, my sanctuary, was a converted loft in the warehouse district. Minimalist, clean, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. The walls were lined with monitors displaying real-time market data, portfolio performance, and news feeds from around the world. This was where the real Nate lived, not the domesticated version Sandra had tried to create. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25 and settled into my leather chair, finally allowing myself to process what had just happened. The humiliation still burned, but underneath it was something else, a cold satisfaction that the mask had finally come off. My secure phone, the one Sandra didn't know about, was already ringing. David Chen's name appeared on the screen. "David," I answered. "Nate, what the hell just happened up there?" His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Please tell me you're not pulling out because of whatever idiotic thing your wife just said." "That depends," I said, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "What exactly did she say after I left?" "She's claiming it was a joke. Says she had no idea about your involvement with the company. Is that possible?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sandra's never asked about my work beyond whether the check's clear. She thinks I'm a freelance nobody who lives off her salary. "Jesus Christ," David's voice dropped to a whisper. "Nate, half the board was there. They heard everything. If this gets out, if investors think there's instability in our ownership structure..." "There isn't," I said calmly. "At least, there wasn't. But I'm curious, David. What's Sandra's position at Technova worth to you?" The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Nate," David said finally, "she's a good manager. Her team likes her, but she's not irreplaceable." "Good to know. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said, taking another sip of whiskey, "that it's time Sandra learned what freeloading actually looks like." After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my loft, watching the city lights reflect off the river. My phone, the regular one, had 37 missed calls and 62 text messages. I scrolled through them without reading, noting the progression from confusion to panic in the contact names alone. Sandra had called 19 times. Her parents had called 6 times between them. Even Jessica from HR had texted, probably trying to figure out if she still had a job. I deleted everything without reading it and went to bed. Saturday morning brought a new round of calls, which I continued to ignore. Instead, I spent the day doing what I did best: research. Sandra wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that she'd been playing checkers while I'd been mastering chess. By Sunday evening, I had a complete picture of my wife's professional life. Her salary, her performance reviews, her expense reports, her email patterns, her meeting schedules. Amazing what you could learn when you owned the company's servers. What I found was interesting. Sandra had been very creative with her expense accounts over the past 2 years. Business dinners that looked suspiciously like personal meals, hotel charges for client meetings in cities where we had no clients, conference registrations for events that didn't exist, but the real gem was buried in her email metadata. For the past 18 months, she'd been having regular correspondence with Liam Rodriguez, Technova's VP of Business Development, long emails sent after hours, meeting requests for strategy sessions that never appeared on official calendars. I pulled up Liam's employment file. 42 years old, divorced, expensive tastes, and a salary that couldn't support them. He drove a BMW he couldn't afford and lived in a condo that was mortgaged to the hilt. The pieces fell into place with crystalline clarity. Sandra's late nights at the office, her sudden interest in looking good for work events, her casual cruelty toward me, as if she were trying to justify something to herself. My phone rang. David again. "The board met this morning," he said without preamble. "Emergency session. They want to know your intentions." "My intentions are simple," I said. "I want a full audit of Sandra's department. Expenses, productivity metrics, personnel reviews, everything. Nate, I also want to review all executive compensation packages. Seems like it's time to make sure we're getting value for our investment." "You're talking about people's livelihoods." "I'm talking about my investment. My $12 million that saved this company and created jobs for people who apparently think it's funny to mock their primary benefactor." David sighed. What do you want me to tell the board? Tell them I'm taking a more active role in company operations, starting immediately. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that matched my mood perfectly. I dressed carefully. Charcoal suit, Italian leather shoes, the Rolex that Sandra had always called pretentious. Today, pretentious was exactly the image I wanted to project. Technova's headquarters occupied 15 floors of a glass tower downtown. I'd been there exactly twice since my initial investment, once for the closing and once for a Christmas party that Sandra had begged me to attend. Both times, I'd been introduced as Sandra's husband and promptly forgotten. Today would be different. The lobby was all marble and chrome, designed to impress clients and intimidate competitors. The security guard at the front desk looked up as I approached, his expression politely professional. Good morning. How can I help you? Nathan Meridian to see David Chen. I believe I'm expected. The guard's fingers flew across his keyboard, then stopped. His expression shifted subtly as he read whatever had appeared on his screen. Of course, Mr. Meridian. Please take the express elevator to the 15th floor. Mr. Chen will meet you there. The elevator ride gave me time to center myself. What I was about to do would change everything, not just for Sandra, but for everyone who'd laughed at her little joke. There would be collateral damage. There always was. But sometimes collateral damage was the point. David was waiting when the elevator doors opened, his face grim. Nate, I wasn't sure you'd actually come. I'm a man of my word, David. You should know that by now. He led me down a hallway lined with conference rooms, most of them occupied by people in expensive suits, having intense conversations. The Monday morning energy of corporate America in full swing. The audit you requested, David said, handing me a thick folder. Sandra's department last 2 years. I had our accounting firm work through the weekend. I flipped through the pages as we walked. The numbers told a story of systematic abuse, expense reports that bordered on fraud, productivity metrics that didn't match the reported hours, personnel decisions that seemed designed to benefit specific individuals. And the executive compensation review? That's more complicated. Some of these packages were negotiated. By whom? David stopped walking. Mostly by Sandra, actually. She's been handling HR liaison duties for senior staff. Beautiful. Sandra had been negotiating sweetheart deals for her friends while portraying me as a deadbeat at home. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me laugh. I want to see the boardroom where the emergency meeting was held, I said. Nate, I'm not sure that's... David? I stopped and looked at him directly. I own this company. I want to see the room where my employees discussed my wife's public humiliation of me. Is that unreasonable? He led me to a conference room on the 14th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. A mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. This is where they met? Yes. And what was the consensus? David shifted uncomfortably. There was concern about stability, about whether personal issues might affect business decisions. Smart board, I said, settling into the chair at the head of the table. What else? There were questions about Sandra's judgment. Several board members felt that publicly humiliating a major investor showed poor decision-making skills. And her position? That's what I wanted to discuss with you. The board is prepared to make changes if necessary. I leaned back in the chair, looking out at the city below. Somewhere down there, Sandra was probably getting ready for work, blissfully unaware that her world was about to implode. I don't want her fired, I said finally. David looked surprised. You don't? No. I want her to understand what she's lost. Firing her would be mercy. I want her to watch everything she's built crumble while knowing she caused it herself. What are you proposing? I opened the audit folder and spread the contents across the conference table. Sandra's expense irregularities total approximately $47,000 over 2 years. Not enough for criminal charges, but certainly grounds for disciplinary action. Agreed. Her friend Liam has been even more creative. $63,000 in questionable expenses. Plus he's been approving his own travel budgets. That's a fireable offense. David nodded slowly. What about the others? The people at the party? Jessica from HR approved most of these expense reports without proper documentation. That's either incompetence or complicity. Brad from marketing has been padding his conference budgets and taking personal trips on company money. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the ant-like people on the sidewalks below. Here's what's going to happen, I said without turning around. You're going to restructure the entire management hierarchy. Sandra keeps her title but loses her team and her budget authority. Liam gets fired for cause. No severance, no references. Jessica gets demoted to assistant level. Brad gets transferred to our satellite office in North Dakota. That's pretty harsh, Nate. Is it? I turned to face him. These people stole from me, David. They took my money and used it to fund their lifestyles while mocking me as a freeloader. I'd say I'm being generous by not pressing charges. David was quiet for a long moment. And if Sandra objects? If she threatens to quit? Then she quits, but she won't. She needs this job more than she knows. Why are you so sure? I smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Because I'm about to cut off her other source of income. That evening, I sat in my favorite dive bar, Murphy's Tavern, nursing a beer and watching the news on the mounted television. The place was exactly what it looked like. Worn wooden floors, neon signs advertising beer brands that went out of business in the 80s, and regulars who'd been occupying the same stools since the Clinton administration. It was the perfect place to think, and I had a lot of thinking to do. My phone buzzed. Sandra's name appeared on the screen for the first time since I'd turned it back on. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Nate, please call me back. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. What I said at the party was horrible, and I'm sorry. But we need to talk. Something's happening at work, and I think it might be connected to what happened Friday night. Please, just call me. Her voice was strained, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Good. She was starting to understand that actions had consequences. I ordered another beer and scrolled through my phone, checking the various news feeds and market reports that kept me informed about my investments. Technova's stock had dropped 3 points since Friday, probably due to rumors about internal instability. Nothing major, but enough to get the board's attention. Rough day? I looked up to find a woman in her 30s sliding onto the bar stool next to mine. Blonde hair, tired eyes, wearing scrubs that suggested she'd just gotten off a hospital shift. You could say that, I replied. I'm Tina, she said, extending her hand. And you look like a man with a story. Nathan, and you look like someone who's heard plenty of stories. She laughed. Occupational hazard. I'm a nurse. People tell me things they wouldn't tell their priests. We talked for an hour about nothing important. The weather, the city, the general decline of decent dive bars. It was the first normal conversation I'd had in days, and I found myself relaxing despite everything that was happening. So, Tina said eventually, what's eating at you? And don't say nothing, because I can spot a man in crisis from across a crowded emergency room. I considered how much to tell her. In the end, I settled for a simplified version of the truth. My wife humiliated me in public. Now I'm trying to decide how to respond. Ah! Tina nodded knowingly. The age-old question, revenge or forgiveness? Is there a third option? Justice, she said simply. Sometimes people need to learn that their actions have consequences. That's not revenge, that's education. I liked her perspective. And how does one provide that kind of education? Carefully, methodically, and with a clear understanding of what you want the end result to be. Tina finished her drink and stood to leave. Word of advice from someone who's seen a lot of people at their worst. Don't become something you'll hate when you look in the mirror. After she left, I sat alone with my thoughts and my beer. Justice versus revenge. Education versus retaliation. The distinction mattered, even if the outcome was the same. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. Mr. Meridian, this is Tina Walsh. I got your number from a mutual friend. We need to talk about Sandra. It's important. I stared at the message for a long moment. Tina Walsh. The woman from the bar had been asking about Sandra specifically, which meant this wasn't a coincidence. Someone had sent her to find me. I typed back, "What about Sandra?" The response came quickly. "I work at Mercy General. Sandra brought Liam Rodriguez to the ER 3 months ago. Said he'd fallen downstairs, but his injuries weren't consistent with that story. I've been wondering what really happened." Interesting. Very interesting. "Meet me tomorrow. Same place, 7 p.m. I'll be there." I finished my beer and headed home, my mind racing with new possibilities. If Sandra and Liam's relationship had turned physical, if there had been domestic violence involved, then the situation was more complex than I'd realized. But complexity could be useful. The more secrets people had, the more leverage you could gain. Back at my loft, I spent the evening digging deeper into Liam Rodriguez's background. What I found painted a picture of a man with serious problems. 2 previous relationships that had ended with restraining orders, a gambling problem that had led to significant debt, a pattern of aggressive behavior that had been carefully covered up by expensive lawyers. Sandra had chosen her affair partner poorly, but then again, Sandra had always been attracted to the wrong kind of men. She'd married me thinking I was safe and boring, someone she could control and manipulate. She'd taken up with Liam thinking he was exciting and dangerous, someone who could give her the thrill her marriage lacked. Both choices had been mistakes, but only one of them was about to cost her everything. Tuesday morning brought news that Sandra's world was officially crumbling. David called at 8 a.m. to report that the restructuring was complete. Liam Rodriguez was terminated at 9:15 yesterday, he said. Security escorted him from the building. He was not pleased. Define not pleased. He threw a chair through his office window and threatened to sue everyone from me to the janitor. Legal says we're covered. The expense fraud alone is enough to justify termination for cause. And Sandra. She's been moved to a smaller office on the 3rd floor. Her team has been redistributed among other managers. She's essentially a senior manager with no one to manage. How did she take it? About as well as you'd expect. She demanded to know if this was connected to Friday night. I told her it was a routine restructuring based on performance metrics. Did she believe you? No. I wasn't surprised. Sandra was many things, but she wasn't stupid. She would have connected the dots by now, realized that her public humiliation of me had triggered a chain reaction that was destroying her career. What about the others? Jessica is cleaning out her desk as we speak. Brad is on a plane to Fargo. Apparently, our North Dakota office needs someone to manage their agricultural software division. Perfect. After hanging up, I spent the morning reviewing financial reports and making calls to other portfolio companies. The mundane work of managing investments, due diligence reports, market analysis, strategic planning sessions, the kind of work that Sandra had dismissed as playing on the computer. At noon, my doorman called to announce that I had a visitor. Mrs. Meridian is here to see you, sir. Should I send her up? I considered having him turn her away, but curiosity won. Send her up, Marcus. Sandra arrived at my door looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were shaking slightly. We need to talk, she said without preamble. I stepped aside to let her in, noting how she looked around the loft with surprise. She'd only been here twice before, both times complaining about the cold aesthetic and the excessive technology setup. Nice place, she said, her voice hollow. I'd forgotten how successful it looks. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water? I want answers, Nate. I want to know what you've done to my career. I settled into my leather chair and gestured for her to take the couch. She remained standing, arms crossed, every line of her body radiating tension. I haven't done anything to your career, Sandra. I've simply taken a more active interest in my investment. Your investment? She said it like the words tasted bitter. God, I'm such an idiot. How long have you owned Technova? 3 years, since right after your promotion to manager. The promotion you made possible. The promotion you earned. I may have provided the capital that created the position, but you did the work. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right, and now you're destroying everything I've built because I hurt your feelings at a party. Is that what you think this is about? Hurt feelings? Isn't it? I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Sandra, do you know what I do for a living? You're a tech consultant or something. Freelance work. I manage a portfolio of investments worth approximately $200 million. I own controlling interests in 7 companies, including the one that employs you. I have offices in 4 cities and a staff of 32 people who depend on my decisions for their livelihoods. The silence behind me stretched long enough that I turned to look at her. She was staring at me like I was a stranger. That's impossible, she said finally. I would have known. We're married. I would have seen. What would you have seen, Sandra? You've never asked about my work beyond whether the check's clear. You've never shown interest in my day-to-day activities. You've never even asked why I can afford this loft or the Tesla or the watch you always complain about. I thought you were living off my salary. I was living off my salary and letting you think you were supporting me. There's a difference. She sank onto the couch, her face pale. Why? Because it was easier. Because you seemed happier thinking you were the successful one in this marriage. Because I loved you and I thought that was enough. Loved, past tense. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with tears. What you said at the party was cruel and calculated. It wasn't a joke, Sandra. It was you expressing what you really think of me in front of people whose respect I value. I was drunk. I was excited about the promotion, and I got carried away.
You were sober when you planned it. You were sober when you decided to humiliate me in front of your colleagues and your parents. You were sober when you chose to mock the man who's been funding your lifestyle for 3 years. The tears spilled over then, running down her cheeks in black streaks of mascara. I'm sorry. God, Nate, I'm so sorry. I know I screwed up, but please don't destroy my career over this. I'll do anything to make it right. Anything, she nodded eagerly. Tell me about Liam Rodriguez. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. What about him? How long have you been having an affair with him? We're not. Sandra. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her protests like a blade. I own the company. I have access to email logs, keycard records, expense reports. I know about the hotel rooms, the business dinners that weren't business, the conference trips where no conferences took place. I know about the night you took him to the emergency room and lied about how he got hurt. She crumpled then, sobbing into her hands. 18 months? It started 18 months ago. Why? Because you were never here. Because you spent all your time in this apartment doing whatever it is you do, and I was lonely, and he paid attention to me. I was here every night. I had dinner with you. I went to your company events. I supported your career.
You were physically here, but you were never really present. You were always thinking about something else, always distracted by your work. The work that was paying for our life. I didn't know that, because you never asked. We stared at each other across the room, years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding hanging in the air between us. What happens now? She asked finally. Now you learn what freeloading actually looks like. What does that mean? I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. It means you're going to discover what life is like without my financial support. The house is in my name. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The credit cards are canceled as of this morning. The joint checking account has been closed. You can't do that. We're married. I have rights. You have the right to half of whatever assets we accumulated during our marriage. Unfortunately for you, I can demonstrate that 100% of our assets came from my pre-marital investments and businesses. Your salary went to personal expenses and shopping. My income paid for everything else. She stared at the papers I'd handed her. Bank statements, property deeds, investment records, all of it documenting a financial reality she'd never bothered to understand. This is revenge, she whispered. No, I said. This is education. You wanted to know what it felt like to be married to a freeloader? Now you get to experience it firsthand. And my job? Your job is safe, assuming you can do it competently without Liam's help. Of course, you'll be starting over at the bottom of the management hierarchy, but that's not my problem. She stood on shaky legs, clutching the papers to her chest. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did. You meant every word you said at that party. The only thing you didn't mean to do was get caught. After she left, I poured myself a drink and sat in the gathering dusk of my apartment. Phase 1 was complete. Sandra now understood the scope of her mistake and the consequences of her actions. But I wasn't done yet. There was still the matter of Liam Rodriguez and the other people who'd found my humiliation so amusing. My phone buzzed with a text from Tina Walsh. Still on for tonight? I typed back, absolutely. I have some questions for you. And I have some answers. This is going to be interesting. Murphy's Tavern was busier on Tuesday night, but Tina had secured the same corner booth where we'd talked the night before. She was wearing civilian clothes this time, jeans and a sweater that made her look younger than her nurse's scrubs had suggested. You look like a man who's had a productive day, she said as I slid into the booth across from her. You could say that. Sandra and I had a long overdue conversation. About Liam Rodriguez? Among other things, I signaled the bartender for a beer. You said you had information about him. Tina pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo. This was taken the night Sandra brought him in. She said he'd fallen downstairs. The image showed a man with facial bruises, a split lip, and what looked like defensive wounds on his hands. I'd seen enough bar fights to recognize the signs. Someone beat him up. Someone did. And based on the pattern of injuries, it was probably someone who knew what they were doing. Any idea who? That's where it gets interesting. Tina leaned forward, lowering her voice. I did some digging after I saw them that night. Turns out Liam has a gambling problem, owes money to some very unpleasant people. How much money? According to my sources, about $60,000, to a loan shark named Vincent Torino. The name was familiar. Vincent Torino ran a small but efficient operation out of the industrial district, providing short-term loans to people who couldn't get credit through legitimate channels. His collection methods were rumored to be highly effective. So Liam borrowed money he couldn't repay, and Vincent's people gave him a reminder about his obligations. That would be my guess, but here's the really interesting part. The debt was paid off 2 weeks after his hospital visit. I felt a cold certainty settle in my stomach. $60,000. Exactly the amount that Sandra had been skimming from her expense accounts over the past 18 months. The pieces clicked into place with perfect, awful clarity. Sandra hadn't just been having an affair, she'd been stealing from my company to pay her lover's gambling debts. Every fraudulent expense report, every fake conference registration, every padded business dinner had been part of a scheme to keep Liam from getting beaten up by loan sharks. "There's more," Tina said. "I have a friend who works at First National Bank. Sandra opened a personal account there 6 months ago. She's been making regular deposits. Small amounts, always under $10,000 to avoid reporting requirements." "How much total?" "About $37,000 so far." "She was skimming from the company and hiding the money in a secret account?" "Looks that way." I took a long drink of my beer, processing this new information. Sandra's betrayal was deeper than I'd imagined. She hadn't just been unfaithful, she'd been systematically stealing from me to support her affair. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Tina was quiet for a moment, turning her beer bottle in her hands. "Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trust. My ex-husband cleaned out our joint accounts and disappeared with his secretary. Left me with nothing but debt and a broken heart. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something valuable. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who hurt you the most." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the other patrons and listening to the jukebox play classic rock. Finally, Tina spoke again. "What are you going to do with this information?" "I'm not sure yet. Sandra's already facing consequences for her actions. Her career is essentially over, and she's about to lose everything she thought she owned." But she committed actual crimes. Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. The district attorney would be very interested in this information. "You could have her arrested." "I could, but you won't." I looked at her curiously. "Why do you say that?" "Because if you wanted her in prison, you would have called the police already. You want something else?" She was right, of course. Prison would be too easy, too quick. Sandra would serve her time, get out, and move on with her life. She'd probably write a book about her experience and go on talk shows to discuss the injustice of her situation. "I want her to understand," I said finally. "I want her to truly comprehend what she's lost and why she lost it." "And then?" "And then I want her to live with that knowledge for the rest of her life." Tina nodded approvingly. "Justice rather than revenge." "Exactly. In that case, I have a suggestion." "I'm listening." She pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "My friend at the bank. She's willing to provide copies of Sandra's account records. Unofficial copies, of course." "What would that cost?" "Nothing. She's doing it as a favor to me. Apparently, she's also been betrayed by someone she trusted." I pocketed the card. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. What you do with this information is up to you. Just remember what I said about not becoming something you'll hate in the mirror." After Tina left, I sat alone in the booth, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The man looking back at me was someone I barely recognized, harder, colder, more calculating than the person I'd been a week ago. But maybe that person had been naive. Maybe that person had been too trusting, too willing to overlook the warning signs that his wife was stealing from him and cheating on him. Maybe this new version of myself was who I needed to be. My phone rang. David Chen's name appeared on the screen. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "Liam Rodriguez filed a wrongful termination suit this afternoon. He's claiming that his firing was retaliatory and that he has evidence of financial improprieties at the company." "What kind of evidence?" "He's alleging that certain executives have been manipulating expense reports and that the company has been covering it up to protect favored employees." I almost laughed at the irony. Liam was accusing the company of the exact crimes he and Sandra had been committing. How strong is his case? Legally? Weak. We have documentation of his expense fraud, and his termination was clearly justified, but he's hired Margaret Voss. I knew the name. Margaret Voss was one of the city's most aggressive employment attorneys, known for turning weak cases into expensive settlements through media manipulation and legal harassment. "She'll drag this out for months," David continued. "Make it as public and embarrassing as possible. The board is concerned about the publicity." "Let me guess, they want to settle. They want to make it go away quietly." "No." "Nate, no settlements, David. We fight this. We produce every document, every email, every piece of evidence that shows exactly what Liam Rodriguez was doing. We make him explain his gambling debts and his relationship with Sandra. We make this so public and so embarrassing that no other employee will ever think about stealing from us again." "That could backfire. If Sandra gets dragged into this, Sandra will get dragged into this regardless. Liam knows she was involved in the expense fraud. He'll try to use her as leverage or throw her under the bus to save himself. And you're okay with that? I thought about the secret bank account, the stolen money, the 18 months of lies and betrayal. I'm more than okay with it, I said. I'm counting on it. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my doorman called to announce that Margaret and Richard, Sandra's parents, were requesting a meeting. I hadn't seen them since the promotion party, where they'd laughed so heartily at their daughter's humiliation of me. The memory of Margaret covering her mouth to hide her amusement was still fresh in my mind. Send them up, Marcus. They arrived looking every inch the successful suburban couple they'd always been. Richard in his expensive suit, Margaret in her designer dress and pearls. They'd built their wealth through a combination of real estate investments and Richard's law practice, and they'd never let anyone forget it. Nathan, Richard said as I opened the door, we need to talk. Please, come in. They entered my loft with the same surprised expression Sandra had worn, taking in the expensive furnishings and high-tech setup with obvious confusion. Drink? I offered. This isn't a social call, Margaret said coldly. We're here about what you've done to Sandra. I settled into my chair and gestured for them to take the couch. They remained standing, presenting a united front of parental disapproval. What exactly have I done to Sandra? Don't play games with us, Richard snapped. We know you're behind what's happening at her job. We know you're using your connections to punish her for a harmless joke. Harmless joke? I repeated the words slowly. Is that how you remember it? Sandra was excited about her promotion, Margaret said. She had a few too many glasses of champagne and said something foolish. That's hardly grounds for destroying her career. You laughed. They exchanged glances. What? At the party, when Sandra introduced me as her freeloading ex-husband with no degree and no future, you laughed. Both of you. Margaret, you actually covered your mouth like you were trying not to be too obvious about how funny you found it. Margaret's cheeks flushed. It was awkward. We didn't know how to respond. You could have defended me. You could have told your daughter that publicly humiliating her husband was inappropriate. Instead, you joined in the mockery. We never meant, Richard began. You meant exactly what you did, I interrupted. You've spent 12 years thinking I wasn't good enough for your daughter. You've made snide comments about my lack of ambition, my casual dress, my failure to provide Sandra with the lifestyle you thought she deserved. Friday night was just the first time you felt free to express those feelings publicly. That's not true, Margaret protested. Isn't it? Richard, what did you tell your golf buddies about me? Margaret, what did you say to your book club friends about your daughter's underachieving husband? Their silence was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Sandra is going to face the consequences of her actions. All of her actions. Her career is over, her marriage is over, and her comfortable lifestyle is over. She's going to learn what it means to support herself without help from anyone else. You can't do this, Richard said. We won't let you destroy our daughter out of spite. Spite? I stood and walked to my desk, pulling out the folder of evidence I'd compiled. Richard, you're a lawyer. Tell me what you see here. I spread the documents across the coffee table. Bank records, expense reports, email logs, photographs of Liam's injuries. Richard leaned forward, his professional instincts taking over. As he read, his expression shifted from anger to confusion to horror. Jesus Christ, he whispered. What is it? Margaret demanded. Sandra's been embezzling money from the company. $63,000 over 18 months, used to pay gambling debts for her lover. Margaret sank onto the couch, her face pale. That can't be right. It's all documented, I said. Every fraudulent expense report, every fake conference registration, every padded business dinner. She's been systematically stealing from my company to fund her affair. Your company? I own 80% of Technova Industries. The $12 million investment that saved the company and created Sandra's job came from me. She's been stealing from her own husband to pay her lover's debts. Richard was still reading, his lawyer's mind processing the implications. This is federal crime territory. Wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement. She could go to prison for 20 years. She could, I agreed, but I'm not interested in sending her to prison. What do you want? Margaret asked. I want her to understand what she's done. I want her to live with the knowledge that she destroyed her own life through greed and betrayal. I want her to spend the rest of her life knowing that she had everything, a successful career, a comfortable lifestyle, a husband who loved her, and she threw it all away for an affair with a gambling addict who's now trying to destroy her to save himself. Liam's lawsuit, Richard said, understanding dawning in his eyes. He'll claim Sandra was the mastermind behind the embezzlement scheme. He'll say she seduced him and manipulated him into helping her steal money. He'll paint himself as the victim and her as the predator. Can you stop it? I can make it go away completely. One phone call and Liam Rodriguez disappears from all our lives forever. What's the price? I looked at Margaret, then at Richard. I want you to understand something. For 12 years, you've treated me like I wasn't good enough for your daughter. You've made me feel unwelcome at family gatherings, dismissive of my contributions to Sandra's life, contemptuous of what you saw as my lack of ambition. Nathan, Margaret began, I'm not finished. You raised a daughter who thought it was acceptable to publicly humiliate her husband for entertainment. You created a person who could steal $60,000 from her own spouse and sleep peacefully at night. You built a family culture where cruelty and selfishness were acceptable as long as they were dressed up as jokes and success. We never meant for any of this to happen, Richard said quietly. Maybe not, but it happened anyway, and now you have to live with the consequences. I gathered up the documents and returned them to the folder. Sandra has 30 days to find a new place to live. After that, she's on her own. Her job at Technova will continue as long as she can do it competently, but her days of special treatment and expense account fraud are over. As for Liam's lawsuit, I'll handle it in whatever way I see fit. And if we refuse to accept this, Richard asked, then I turn all of this evidence over to the FBI and let the justice system handle it. Sandra goes to prison, you lose your daughter, and everyone gets to read about it in the newspapers. They left without another word, their faces gray with shock and defeat. I watched from my window as they got into their Mercedes and drove away, probably heading straight to Sandra's house to deliver the news. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Sandra's name on the screen. You told them, she said without preamble. They came here demanding answers. I gave them the truth. They're devastated. My mother is crying. My father looks like he's aged 10 years. I'm sorry they're hurt. But this is the reality of the situation, Sandra. Actions have consequences. What about Liam's lawsuit? What about it? He's going to blame everything on me. He's going to say I forced him to help me steal money. Did you? Silence. Sandra? It wasn't like that. He needed help, and I cared about him. I didn't want to see him get hurt. So you stole from my company to pay his gambling debts. I was going to pay it back. With what money? I don't know. I hadn't figured that part out yet. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Here's what's going to happen with Liam's lawsuit, I said. I'm going to fight it publicly and aggressively. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence is going to become part of the public record. The newspapers will have a field day with the story of the adulterous wife who stole from her husband to pay her lover's gambling debts. You're going to destroy me. No, Sandra. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure everyone understands how it happened. There has to be another way, some kind of deal we can make. There is. Hope crept into her voice. What? Disappear. What do you mean? Leave town. Start over somewhere else. Build a new life under a different name. Never contact me, your parents, or anyone from your old life again. That's not a deal. That's exile. That's survival. Because if you stay here, if you try to fight this, I will use every resource at my disposal to make sure the world knows exactly who you are and what you've done. And if I go? Then Liam's lawsuit becomes a simple matter of an employee who was fired for cause trying to extort money from his former employer. The evidence of his gambling debts and expense fraud speaks for itself. He'll lose, probably face criminal charges, and disappear into the legal system. What about the money I took? Consider it the cost of your education. She was quiet for a long moment. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours. And if I choose to stay and fight? Then tomorrow morning, I call the FBI and turn over everything I have. You'll be arrested by Friday. After I hung up, I poured myself a drink and sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of red and gold. In 24 hours, this would all be over. Sandra would either disappear into voluntary exile or face the full weight of the justice system. Either way, she would finally understand the true cost of her betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Tina Walsh. Saw the news about the lawsuit. How are you holding up? I typed back, better than expected. Want to grab dinner tomorrow night? I'd like that. Somewhere nicer than Murphy's? I know just the place. For the first time in days, I found myself smiling. The old chapter of my life was ending, but maybe it was time to start writing a new one. Thursday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of weather that made the city feel alive with possibility. I stood at my window, watching people walk along the riverfront below, couples holding hands, friends laughing together, strangers passing each other with the casual indifference of urban life. My phone had been silent all day. No calls from Sandra, no texts, no desperate last-minute pleas for mercy. The 24-hour deadline had passed at noon, and her silence was answer enough. At 6 p.m., my doorman called to announce that someone was here to see me. I expected it to be the FBI agents I'd contacted that morning, coming to collect the evidence I'd promised them. Instead, it was David Chen, looking haggard and exhausted. "It's over," he said as soon as I opened the door. "What's over?" "The lawsuit. Liam Rodriguez withdrew it this morning. His lawyer filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, which means he can't refile." I invited him in, curious about this unexpected development. Did he say why? Apparently, someone provided his attorney with evidence that Liam had been embezzling money from the company. Faced with the prospect of criminal charges, he decided to cut his losses and disappear. "Someone provided evidence?" David looked at me suspiciously. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "I might have made some inquiries. What about Sandra?" "That's the interesting part. She didn't show up for work today. Her apartment is empty. Looks like she cleared out sometime last night. The landlord says she paid 3 months' rent in advance and left the keys on the kitchen counter." Sandra had chosen exile over exposure. Part of me was disappointed. I'd been looking forward to watching her face the consequences of her actions in a very public trial. But perhaps this was better. She would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering if today was the day her past caught up with her. "There's something else," David continued. "The board met this afternoon. They want to offer you a position as chief investment officer. Full salary, benefits, corner office, the works. I appreciate the offer, but I prefer working independently." "I figured you'd say that, but the offer stands if you ever change your mind." After David left, I spent an hour reviewing the final reports from my investigation into Sandra's activities. The FBI would receive everything tomorrow morning: bank records, expense reports, email logs, witness statements. Even though Sandra had disappeared, they would still build a case against her. Her name would go into databases, her photograph would be distributed to law enforcement agencies, her social security number would be flagged for suspicious activity. She could run, but she couldn't truly hide. Not in the digital age. At 7 p.m., I met Tina at Chez Laurent, a French restaurant overlooking the harbor. She looked stunning in a black dress that complemented her blonde hair, and for the first time in weeks, I found myself thinking about something other than revenge and betrayal. "You look like a man who's had a weight lifted off his shoulders," she said as we were seated at a table by the window. "Sandra disappeared last night, packed up and left town rather than face the consequences of what she'd done. How do you feel about that?" "Oddly satisfied. She'll spend the rest of her life wondering when her past will catch up with her. That's a special kind of prison." We ordered wine and appetizers, settling into the kind of comfortable conversation that comes naturally between people who understand each other. Tina told me about her work at the hospital, the challenges of dealing with people in crisis, the satisfaction of helping them heal. I found myself opening up about my business, my investments, the loneliness of success without someone to share it with. "So what happens now?" she asked over dessert. "Now I figure out what the rest of my life looks like. I've spent so much time focused on business and dealing with Sandra's betrayal that I haven't thought much about what I actually want." "Any ideas?" "A few. I'm thinking about starting a foundation, something focused on helping people who've been victims of financial fraud. Use my experience to prevent others from going through what I went through." "That sounds meaningful." "What about you? Any plans beyond saving lives and solving other people's problems?" She smiled. "I'm thinking about taking some time off. Maybe travel a bit, see parts of the world I've only read about in magazines." "Alone?" "That depends on whether I meet someone worth traveling with." Our eyes met across the table, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine connection with another person. Not the desperate neediness that had characterized my relationship with Sandra, but something healthier and more balanced. "I should mention," I said, "that I'm technically still married. The divorce won't be final for several months." "I should mention," she replied, "that I don't mind complicated situations. Life's too short to wait for perfect timing." We walked along the harbor after dinner, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. When we reached my building, she accepted my invitation to come up for coffee. We stood on my balcony, looking out at the city lights reflected in the water. The night air was warm and filled with the sounds of urban life: distant traffic, music from nearby restaurants, the occasional horn from boats in the harbor. "Do you regret it?" Tina asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "The way you handled things with Sandra? The systematic destruction of her life?" I considered the question seriously. No. She made her choices, and I made mine. I could have handled it differently, been more forgiving, more understanding. But forgiveness has to be earned, and Sandra never showed any genuine remorse for what she'd done. What if she had? What if she'd come to you honestly, confessed everything, and begged for forgiveness? Then we'd be having a different conversation. But she didn't. She lied, she stole, she betrayed me in the most fundamental ways possible, and when she got caught, her only concern was avoiding consequences. So you gave her consequences? I gave her justice. There's a difference. Tina nodded thoughtfully. I can respect that. Sometimes people need to learn that their actions have real costs. Exactly. She turned to face me, her expression serious. For what it's worth, I think you handled it as well as anyone could have. You didn't let anger make you stupid, and you didn't let hurt make you cruel. You were methodical and fair. Thank you. That means more than you know. She reached up and kissed me then, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as I responded. When we broke apart, she smiled. So, she said, tell me about these travel plans of yours. 3 months later, I stood in the same spot on my balcony, reading a newspaper article that had been forwarded to me by David Chen. The headline read, Former tech executive arrested in Miami on federal fraud charges. The article was brief but comprehensive. Sandra had been working as a bookkeeper for a small import company under an assumed name when the FBI finally tracked her down. Apparently, old habits died hard. She'd been skimming money from her new employer's accounts, probably thinking she was too smart to get caught twice. She was wrong. The article mentioned that she was facing federal charges in 2 jurisdictions and would likely spend the next decade in prison. Her photograph showed a woman I barely recognized, thinner, harder, with the desperate look of someone who'd been running for too long. I folded the newspaper and tossed it in the trash. That chapter of my life was finally completely closed. Tina emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee. We'd been living together for 6 weeks now, and the arrangement was working out better than I dared to hope. She brought warmth and laughter into my life, while I provided stability and security for hers. Good news? She asked, noticing my expression. Closure, I said simply. We sat together on the balcony, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The city was waking up below us, full of people starting new days, making new choices, creating new possibilities. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Divorce finalized. Congratulations on your freedom. I showed the message to Tina, who smiled and raised her coffee cup. Cheers, she said. Cheers, I replied, touching my cup to hers. To new beginnings. And to justice served. And to the last laugh. We drank our coffee and watched the city come alive. 2 people who'd found each other in the aftermath of betrayal and built something better from the ruins of their past lives. Sandra had been right about one thing at her promotion party. I really was someone with no degree and no future. At least, no future with her. But I'd built a new future, one based on honesty instead of lies, partnership instead of exploitation, and genuine connection instead of manipulation. As for Sandra, she'd finally learned what it meant to be truly alone, truly powerless, and truly without options. She'd discovered that actions have consequences, that betrayal has costs, and that some mistakes can't be undone with apologies and excuses. She'd wanted to introduce me as her ex-husband with no future. Now she was the one with no future, while I was building something better with someone who actually deserved it. The last laugh, as it turned out, was mine after all.